The Celtic creation myth can be summarized rather briefly. To begin with, it focuses around the mytheme of the division, the violent division of earth and sky. This is not the Yemo and Mannus creation myth theory, the reconstruction done by Bruce Lincoln. This has nothing to do with Yemo and Mannus or Bruce Lincoln, which I have debunked on my channel. The Celtic creation myth can be most clearly identified by this central event, which is the violent dividing of the union of earth and sky, or the violent ending of the union of earth and sky. And now, in different traditions, the union of earth and sky can be depicted as a marriage union or as a hermaphroditic union, where the male and female, earth and sky, or sky and earth, are depicted as one unity, therefore they are one double being, a hermaphrodite, which is then split apart violently. In the Greek tradition, of course, we have Gaia and Uranos, earth and sky, whose union is depicted as a kind of marriage union. But the core mytheme is the violent dividing of this union of earth and sky. And so in the Irish text, the Book of Invasions, or the Lawer Gawala Erin, we have Eriu with her two sisters. All three of these sisters appear to represent the nature of Ireland itself, specifically the land of Ireland and its fertility, the fat of the land. The name Eriu seems to mean something related to fat and abundance of the land. And of course, if we picture the land of Ireland, it is a land mass by microcosm equaling macrocosm. The land of Ireland stands for the earth itself, or the land itself. And so the mirror image husbands, the three husbands of the three Ireland goddesses who stand for Mother Earth, the mirror image three husbands of the Mother Earth, in all of the examples that we have of other traditions, the mirror image perfectly matching Mother Earth is always sky, Father Sky. For example, Uranos being the primordial pair of Gaia, Diaush Pitar, Father Sky, being the pair of Prithvi, the earth in the Vedas, Anu or An being the pair of Ki, the earth, so Anu being the sky and Ki, the earth, in the Sumerian mythology. And of course, Geb and Nut being an inverted pair of female sky and male earth. We have this nearly universal mytheme of the violent division of earth and sky. We, of course, also have the violent division of earth from sky in the Norse myth of Ymir. Ymir specifically is the union of earth and the heavens. His head, when severed, becomes the heavens, aka the sky, the dome of sky, or the dome of the heavens. His body becomes earth because he was the primordial union of earth and sky in himself. He is then violently divided by Odin and his two brothers, specifically. So in the Lawer Gawala Erin, the Book of Invasions, in the Sons of Mill section, we have specifically three brothers, Averfin, Averghin, and Erevan. And these three brothers are the leaders of the Sons of Mill. Now, the text tells us who specifically they attack in the battle. And it tells us that they attack no one else except the three husbands of Eriu and her sisters. So these three earth goddess figures, Eriu, Fotla, and Banva, are married to Macgrania, Mackecht, and Macquill. And these three husbands, who seem to be in the position of what we usually see to be the sky husbands, but in a triplified form, in a triple division, symbolic division, they are specifically killed by the three leaders of the sons of Mill, Averfin, Averghin, and Erevan, these three brothers. Very curious. So we have this passage specifically describing the violent ending of the marriage union of Eriu and her sisters with the triple husbands. And I've shown that passage. I can post it again. Specifically, it says that Mackecht, Macquill, and Macgrania, the three male husbands of the triple Mother Earth, are killed specifically by the three leading brothers of the sons of Mill. Now, this is glossed over because it's doesn't draw attention to itself. It's in a long sequence of narrative that people don't understand. But it is no coincidence that the one attack that is made, that is highlighted at the very grand conclusion, actually, of their battle, it's the very end of the Tuatha Dé Danann section where this attack is described. And in that, it is the three leading brothers, Averfin, Averghin, and Erevan, kill Mackecht, Macquill, and Macgrania, the husbands. And then right after that, it describes how Eriu and her sisters also die right after. And so this is the violent destruction of that unity, of that primordial marriage. It's this violent ending of a marriage. Why is this happening? And so we can see that, of course, scholars have time and again come back to this particular narrative, this text, because it screams out with various creation myth type motifs found in other cultures. For instance, the sort of most obvious on the surface one is that the grandfather of Averfin, Averghin, and Erevan is named Bile, B-I-L-E, and Bile is the name of the word for the sacred trees in Ireland. So it is the word that stands for sacred tree. We can then presume that he is a god related to the sacred tree, or even embodying the sacred tree. So why is this sacred tree? Perhaps the cosmic tree itself. Why is that the grandfather of these three brothers who just so happen to do this act that appears to be the killing of the triple husband of the triple Mother Earth? And of course, furthermore, as Celtic Source and others have noted, Averghin does this magical poetic pronouncement, these poetic pronouncements, which seem to sort of describe all of existence in a way, weaving all of existence, theoretically, as he puts it. He does this right in this section. And furthermore, he sort of pronounces these peace-weaving prophecies over the land of Ireland that they come to, which seem to sort of attempt to create a sort of order, a sort of a social order, and hope for prosperity in the land through this magical language. All of this could be creation type events, the creation through words, the creation of peace and a establishment of the future through poetic words. All of this can be taking place. Additionally, as John Carey, for example, the scholar, and others have noted, the other notable brother of Averfin, Averghin, and Erevan is Averdown, D-O-N-N. And Down is also the name of the god of the dead in other places, in other lore of Ireland. And Averdown is known for his Isle of the Dead, the House of Down, or Teich Down. And And yeah, the dead go to his isle to pass through in some sort of way. And so clearly, Averdown bears the name of an important deity, and Averfin appears to bear the name of what seems to have been a deity, because we have between Ireland and Wales the name Finn or Gwyn, and these are cognate, with the F and the G just being how different languages developed. And so between these, scholars believe there's enough evidence to argue for a deity underlying Finn and Gwyn, with Gwyn being one of these most prominent folkloric potential deities, even treated like a lord of the underworld, a lord of the underworld and the dead, and perhaps something even more powerful than that. And of course, there are connections of Finn McCool and Gwion Bach himself, Finn and Gwion, also being seemingly cognate names, and they seem to share the same sort of myth motif of the food of knowledge and the enlightenment gained by it, of the seer poet. And so this suggests there's a deep body of lore that is mythological connected to this name, Finn or Gwyn, and also poetic seership. We know that Averyin is a poetic seer. We know that Fionn or Finn MacCool is a poetic seer, as is Taliesin. And so we know that this is a poetic seer type of grouping, with Averfin, Finn meaning seer or poet, and his brother Averyin displaying very clearly a kind of poetic peace weaving and creation magic. And so between these figures, there are divine names and divine powers very clearly being shown, and of a specific type. Furthermore, we know, as John Carey has pointed out, that in the Vedic material, the famous first mortal to die is called Yama, is named Yama. And when he dies, he's this first one to die as a mortal. And after dying, he transitions to becoming actually the Lord of the dead. He gives up immortality and becomes mortal and dies, and thus becomes the Lord of the dead, Yama, having a domain of the dead called Yamaloka, or other names attached to it. But this reminds John Carey and others of how Averdown is the one who dies on the journey to Ireland, the first one to die before reaching shore. And then, of course, we know the folkloric mythological figure Down having his land of the dead also. So these two pieces put together suggest that we were dealing with an early first time before death and the land of the dead is established, and that Down could be just like Yama from this Indo-European root, because it has these two elements of being the first of a type to die, and then also in a separate section becoming or being the Lord of the dead in the mythological layer. Not only this, though, we have the great-grandfather of Averfin, Averyin, and Erevan is called Briochan. Briochan is then the father of Bila, the sacred tree named figure. But Briochan is a lord of a tower, a famous tower in Spain called the Tower of Briochan, or Tor Briochan. And this tower then bears the sort of universal symbol of the axis mundi, because tower or pillar is this common, well-known trope or symbol of the axis mundi, and the axis mundi is this center point from which creation can flow out in different mythologies. For instance, this is probably most clear in, again, the Vedic mythology, where we have the Skamba pillar a pillar, like a tower-like pillar, and tower and pillar are sort of interchangeable symbols. The symbol of the Brahman absolute that first appears most clearly within the Vedas is found in the Atharva Veda 10.6 in the hymn to the Skamba pillar. Skamba means pillar, essentially. But this word Skamba denotes the fulcrum of all existence and is a symbol of the absolute, which undergirds and also contains all existence and also all non-existence. So it is above and beyond everything. It is prior to everything. And specifically in Atharva Veda 10.7, we have a very important passage, which is that it says, "Who out of many, tell me, is that Skamba, in whom men recognize the waters, Brahma, in whom they know the worlds and their enclosures, in whom are non-existence and existence." And so this summarizes what we can also see throughout the Vedic material, reiterated in different ways, and that is that the Skamba transcends specifically the duality of existence and non-existence, and that this existence and non-existence is summarizing this the first duality that springs up after the absolute, existence and non-existence. And those are symbolized by the other pair that is mentioned in that passage, which is Brahma. Brahma is the god who is the totality, who first springs up, embodying the coherent realm of being, which is existence, okay? And it is immediately paired and juxtaposed with the waters. The waters, repeatedly, also in the other Vedic creation myth of the Rig Veda, the waters, specifically the dark waters in Rig Veda 10.129, symbolize non-existence, or even a state that is more vague, like before non-existence or existence can be the waters. But when juxtaposed with being or with existence or with Brahma, the waters symbolize that non-existence, while Brahma symbolizes existence. And so we know that waters is non-existent, and then we also have the existent, which is being or the cosmos. Cosmos is the sort of created universe of being. We also know in, for example, Norse mythology, that the cosmos of being is symbolized as the tree Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil has within it the 9 realms, which are the cosmos. Therefore, Yggdrasil is this tree which reaches throughout all of being, all existence. The tree then symbolizes being, the flourishing world. And in the Vedic material also, as I've shown, Brahma, who symbolizes being, is the one identified with the sacred tree also. In one instance, the sacred tree grows from his head. In another passage, the sacred tree, the cosmic tree, is called Brahma's tree. In any case, this clearly shows that the sacred tree is identifiable with this coherent realm of being, which is then juxtaposed to the waters of non-being. Now, Bila, son of Briochan of the tower, Bila, his name means sacred tree. He has a brother whose name is Mirhevne. Now, Mirhevne, Muirthemne, means dark sea. Dark sea. So, dark waters, dark sea. Again, in Rig Veda 1.129, the Nasadiya Sukta, it specifically begins with a scene where it is describing the dark waters. It is a dark and signless ocean, it says. And from that dark and signless ocean, Brahma emerges, juxtaposing himself to the dark waters. This is a universal image, the dark waters of non-being, and then the being who embodies the coherent totality of being emerges as this golden egg in this Nasadiya Sukta, and then he and then the sacred tree essentially grows from him, or he is identified with it, because he is that axis mundi in himself. Brahma is in the center. He is the center point and the coherent totality. Around him is this vaguer non-being, which is the dark waters. So here with Bila, sacred tree, he just so happens to have a brother named Dark Ocean. This is happening as these are the grandparent generation of Aver-Finn and his brothers, who I just described, violently killing the triple husbands of the Mother Earth, of Eriu, Ireland, and her two sisters, whose names symbolize Earth, are connected to the fatness of the land. Okay, so this is a lot of symbolism that we see in other cases of creation myths, in other traditions, where it's quite clear. Why do we have dark waters? That's quite literally his name, Dark Ocean, brother of sacred tree. Their father is Pillar Lord named Briochan. Now, like I said, Skamba, the pillar, so Tower Lord Briochan, he's Briochan of the tower. He builds the tower, and his sons leave it to enter Ireland like an emanation from this axis mundi. Why do we have, just like in the Vedas, the beginning point is the pillar rather than tower, pillar and tower, and the absolute is called Brahman. Brahman, the Skamba, or pillar of Brahman. In the Irish story, we have Briochan, Breoghan, or multiple other spellings. But what I've shown is far and away the most consistent etymology of Briochan is that it comes from the exact same root on the Proto-Indo-European level as Brahman. Briochan, Brahman, this famous root word of Brahman, which indicates high or strong. It is this fundamental root for the concept of the Brahman. It just so happens to be attached to this Lord of the Pillar, who fathers Dark Ocean and Sacred Tree. From Sacred Tree, who would symbolize being, and Brahma, of course, the Lord of the tree, is the father of all the other gods. He is the father of the lineage of gods. It is Bila, Sacred Tree, it is his lineage that becomes Aver-Finn, Down, Averghin, and Eravon. These just happen to be the grandsons of Bila, this one who was juxtaposed with the Dark Ocean, and son of the Lord of the Tower, whose name is Briochan, just coincidentally the same root word and phonetically very similar to Brahman. If you just listen to Briochan and Brahman, it's like you can see how they both split from a more ancient Proto-Indo-European concept connected to this root word and already tied to this tower or pillar symbolism, and being this starting point from which creation emanates and emerges.
So there you have it. We do have a Celtic creation myth, we have an Irish creation myth, and we also have a Welsh creation myth of a similar type. This is in Branwen, daughter of Llŷr, which tells much the same myth type, although of course with numerous different details and framings that are part of that tradition and the way that they understood and told their version of the story. But at its core, the story of Branwen is this same myth type of the union of earth and sky, Branwen being the equivalent of Eriu, and her husband, Matholwch, being the embodied sky deity. Euhemerized, once again, version of the sky deity, and this is then a euhemerized or coded Romance version of the myth. Yet it is also one of the most detailed versions of the myth that we have, thus writing it off as just an echo of a myth or as not qualifying as mythology is missing the point that it actually preserves many of the most archaic details in one of the most fleshed out versions of the story. This is because at its core, the Indo-European mytheme involves the violent attack on sky, on Father Sky, the embodied sky deity such as Uranos, by a specific god type. And this god type is Cronus, of course, and it is Finn, of course, and here in the Welsh version it is Efnysien with his brothers. Efnysien being this more hostile tip of the spear of this attack, who sets it in motion, causes it to come about through his hostility. That is because he is the hostile face of this god type, the god type being the hostile destroyer god of the Indo-Europeans. That is Rudra, the Rudra type. That is who Cronus is, and that is actually who Finn is, or stands for, because Finn is this god of the warband, the Mannerbund, the Choreos, and that, as we read in the book by Chris Kershaw, the Indo-Germanic Mannerbund, Odin, the one-eyed god, she describes how it is this Rudra-type god who is the lord of this Mannerbund, this warband of youths. And in that book, she pinpoints Fionn MacCool, or Finn, as the probable Irish equivalent, because he has all these same markings, being the hunter who has this outside of society warband of youths around him and takes part in esoteric type of myths. And this sort of thing is a poet connected to poetry, but also war at the same time, and fury. And this is who Odin, of course, is at his core. And this is why, of course, Fintan, who turns into a fish, loses one eye. He becomes the one-eyed fish of all knowledge. And he is this continuation of the Finn type. He is Fintan, or Fionn-tan. And we see, of course, with Odin that he is the one-eyed god. He also turns into a fish in his mythos. He shamanically turns into a fish in I believe, Heimskringla. And so, yes, we also see certain imagery of him as a fish, or connected to fish in some of the more obscure archaeological finds that we have. In any case, it is the continuity of this Rudra type that centers this myth, this creation myth, and solidifies and proves that it is the same myth. Because this is not just any attacker of earth and sky, not any violent attacker of Father Sky. Specifically, it is the Rudra type, who is this hostile god who does the attacking. He leads this attack, that is Cronus, this hostile, slightly fearful god, who yet has connections to esoteric rites and even to intellect and the mind, which, of course, Cronus is called the intellectual principle by the Platonist tradition. And Plato himself connects him to Nous in the Cratylus. And some believe that his name's etymology connects to striking of the mind. In any case, we see that this hostile, poetic, intellect type of god is the attacker in all of these stories. That is Eivor Finn as the leader. We see then, of course, that Efnysien has a brother who is the peaceful side of himself, who is his peaceful double, and that is Nisien. So we have Efnysien, whose name means something like hostile, or Mr. Unpeace, as one scholar simplifies it. And Efnysien's brother is Nisien, whose name seems to then be the opposite, suggesting that his name means Mr. Peace, peaceable. And it is said at the beginning of Branwen, daughter of Lear, that there are these two brothers. One of them brings hostility and destroys peace, essentially, wherever he goes, creates rifts, and that is Efnysien. And he has a brother who makes peace, brings things together wherever he goes, and that is Nisien. This is this, once again, primordial duality, especially in Indo-European mythology, of the two sides of this specific Rudra type. We know them as Rudra and Shiva in the Vedic tradition. And indeed, Rudra is propitiated and asked to be Shiva in the Rig Veda itself. In a sense, Rudra is the all-encompassing name that also focalizes his destructive aspect, just like Finn does. Finn is, all in all, he is Rudra and Shiva in himself, but he stands in the position of the potential destroyer, Rudra. And he has this peaceful brother, Amhairghin, who is his peaceful other side. In the Vedic tradition, we have Rudra, but he's asked to be, please be your peaceful side, please be Shiva. In the Rig Veda itself, the word Shiva is used in an adjectival way, but it is suggesting the same thing, that Rudra can turn his other face and be Shiva, that is auspicious, tranquil, peaceful. And so it is this duality that we can see in the Celtic material and across into the Vedic material, suggesting that it goes very far back and that this is the type of god who is the attacker in this creation myth, because we then have it with Odin. Again, Odin, the one-eyed god, is Rudra, Shiva. He's all in himself. He's both Rudra and Shiva, but he focalizes specifically the Rudra aspect in his name, Odin, and he has a brother who is more passive. It is Heinir. His entire myth is about how he is excessively passive, almost to caricature. And when people ask him to pass judgment on things, he says, let someone else do so. He expresses extreme passivity. And specifically it is said that in the end times, he survives through. And it is said that he holds the prophetic wand. He is like the chief prophet. It says right there. And of course, we know Odin himself is prophetic and poetic. But we have this more passive, peaceful side, Heinir, who is the chief prophet who survives even after Odin dies, carrying forward that Odinic prophetic essence in his passive, peaceful Shiva-type side. So Odin, Heinir, his brother, and his other brother, Lothar, the three brothers who are three aspects of one total deity, that is Odin or the Rudra type, they are the attackers of the primordial union of earth and sky. Except in their myth, their version tells it as one giant who is in himself the primordial union of earth and sky, or earth and the heavens. Heaven, which is pictured as a hard dome. These together make what is called the world egg. The two halves of the world egg are earth and the hard dome of the heavens. The dividing of that is this mythos, the creation myth. In the Orphic myth, it says that when the Orphic egg breaks apart, the bottom half becomes earth, the top half becomes sky or heavens, aka Uranos and Gaia as the earth. So the dividing of earth, the dividing of Gaia, or rather the attack on Uranos by Kronos, which divides Uranos from Gaia in that moment, is the narrative myth version of that dividing of the primordial union of earth and sky, Gaia and Uranos, depicted in a marriage rather than depicted as a hermaphroditic unity, as in Ymir. This marriage version is, of course, what we see in the Celtic versions we have, with Bronwyn and Matholwch, which make earth and sky. In this mythos, it is very frequently depicted as an abusive marriage of some sort. That element does not appear in the Irish version, as far as I can tell, but it is consistent in many other versions. For example, Uranos is coming to essentially force himself on Gaia when Cronus comes to attack, because Uranos is repeatedly fathering children upon Gaia. He is her other half primordially, and he is continually fathering children on her, but then also imprisoning them in her in the depths of earth and causing her pain by this imprisonment. She does not want this cycle of abusiveness, of primordial unpleasantness, and a state that cannot continue to go on any longer. And thus she calls Cronus to her aid. She specifically calls Cronus to her aid. Cronus goes with his brothers, but first he is this tip of the spear who attacks Uranos and severs his genitals, thus stopping this act of violence against Earth. In the story of Branwen and Matholwch, specifically, Branwen is taken by Matholwch to his land to be his wife, and while he's there, he does abusive violence to her. This is known as one of the three great blows of the island of Britain in the Triads, where Matholwch strikes Branwen, and in the narrative version it is, I think, three times, but in the Triads it suggests, a different version suggests that it was one single blow. In any case, there's either 3 or 1 blows, meaning strikes, where Matholwch hits Branwen abusively. But these are obviously symbolic of a great blow of violence, which seem to me to potentially be euphemisms, a euphemistic later version cleaned up of what was sexual violence originally, as we see in Uranos and Gaia. Makes perfect sense, especially when we see the sexual violent element also present in the Vedic version of the myth, and suggested even in the Ymir version, where Ymir is disgustingly having a generative action, a sort of procreation with himself, because he is sky and earth in one, and part of his body is disgustingly rubbing together with other parts of his body. It's saying his arms and his legs are rubbing together disgustingly, and from the fluids, from the sweat therein, children are being born, which are of this giant race, and this whole act is described in a sort of disgusting way. This seems to be a latter version of, again, the sexual, the unpleasant, the unwanted, or even unnatural sexual procreation of the two halves of the primordial sky-earth unity, which are part of the reason why they are then attacked as, why this union is attacked as sort of unnatural and needing to be stopped by the Rudra type attacker. Odin then, of course, attacks Ymir with his brothers, dividing earth from heavens and ending this sexual action that was going on within Ymir himself. In the Vedic version, we have very specifically in Rig Veda 1.71 and Rig Veda 10.61 a little known myth of Rudra Agni, also in these hymns called the Archer being the well-known euphemism of Rudra himself. He's this terrifying archer that almost cannot be named because he is so frightening. In these hymns, Agni, as the archer, aka his Rudra face, in the hymn 10.61, which itself is called a Rudrian hymn, a Raudrian formulation, that is to say, the hymn has as its quality or theme Rudra. In this set of two hymns, Father Sky, or Div, or Diaush, who is the embodiment of Sky, is explicitly sexually assaulting or even raping what is said to be his daughter in a vague sense. Now, it isn't even named who this female is, but as the undivided unity himself, which he is always a part of before being divided, the daughter of Father Sky is implied to be the female aspect of his own self. Rudra is specifically triggered to come and attack Father Sky for this outrage, which specifically is violating sacred order, the cosmic order. And so he comes and he shoots his arrow at Father Sky while he is in the middle of the sexual violence against his female other half or daughter. And just like when Cronus attacks Uranos, he, of course, the genitals of Uranos are highlighted as being attacked. And specifically, the fluids, the blood and semen of Uranos fly in the air and fall into the sea and across the world, creating certain specific offspring. In the attack on Father Sky, that is Diaush or Div, Rudra's arrow strikes Diaush, and his genital member is described as violently being forced out of what he is doing, and the female runs away. And it is then said that his semen, which is fiery, falls to the earth, landing on the earth, and creating a lake of a sort of a liquid fire lake, which then spawns the ancestors of humans, which are the Angirases. And in the story of Uranos, a certain set of ancestors of humans are emitted from the seed and blood of Uranos that comes out at this moment, and these are called the ash tree nymphs, or the Melii. And so in both cases, ancestors of humans spurt out of the fluids that fall when the genital is interrupted of Father Sky, specifically by this destroyer, hostile god who attacks them, Cronus or Rudra, both also being connected to intellect and that sort of thing. Now we also see in this specific hymn, 10.61, that another form of Rudra comes into existence at this moment of attack on Father Sky, and this is called Vastoshpati. Vastoshpati is the guardian of the house, because Vastu is this word for house, sacred house, which implies the sacred space of the sacrifice, which as a microcosm represents the sacred space of the entire cosmos in this picture of a house of sorts, so that Vastoshpati, which is a known epithet of Rudra, who has been doing this attack, Rudra essentially transforms into Vastoshpati, the defender of the house, the Vastu. And what we see with Efnysien, in his war against Mythology, he is the one who specifically appears when Mythology himself, Father Sky, or Diaush, Mythology builds this house that is intended to be for Bran, Bendigeid Bran. And Bendigeid Bran is this giant, of course, and he is the king at the time, so he represents sovereignty, but he's too big for a house. So they build a giant house for him. They also secretly put assassins, warriors in these bags that are hanging from the posts of the house, so that it's a trap. So that this house has to be, when this house is entered, these assassins are supposed to jump out and, of course, kill Bran and his brothers and his entourage. But Efnysien goes in first, and he is too intelligent, he is too aware, and he realizes this is a trap. He knows what's in these bags, and he goes around and kills with his hands all of the men in the bags, thus ending the threat within this house. Essentially what he is doing is he is cleansing the house, this giant house intended to be the site of what is essentially a sacrifice, the killing of these divine figures in this house. He instead cleanses it of these evil presences and thus makes it safe, exactly as, coincidentally, Rudra turns into Vastoshpati, the protector of the house, at this moment when he attacks Diaush and stops his unnatural act. I think this is quite coincidental and probably something sharing a root where Efnysien is taking on this Vastoshpati role to cleanse the house. This is supported by the Kalash myth, where Mahandev or Mandi, Mandi being a shortening of Mahandev, and Mahadeva being the title of Rudra in the Vedas. So scholars know that Mahandev of the Kalash is clearly linguistically the same as Mahadeva. Mahandev is then clearly the Kalash Rudra. This Mahandev is the one who sees this cord connecting Earth to a celestial house in the sky, a palace or a house called the House of Sky, House of Heaven. So this cord between is symbolizing the primordial union of Earth with sky, the House of Sky. However, there are demons in the House of Sky. So first of all, Mahandev's attendant, assistant, the other figure that is appearing with Mahandev is named Death in the Kalash language, and they go together, and Death is the one who actually severs the cord, which is covered with seed chaff, actually, suggesting this sexual imagery that we described. It is this seemingly phallic symbol of this cord connecting Earth and sky that's covered in the seed chaff, and Death, who is Mahandev, the destroyer god's attendant, along with him, severs the cord, thus ending the union of Earth with sky. But then Mahandev himself has to go into the House of Heaven, where the demons are, and specifically at this moment, he has to cleanse the house of demons. So you see, once again, this continuity of this very specific role of this Mahandev or Rudra type, who has to, along with the severing of Earth, of the union of Earth and sky, he has to go into the house belonging to sky and cleanse it of demonic influence that poses this threat. And at this time also, I think the sun is freed and that sort of thing from the house. But these are symbolisms of the moment of creation. Additionally, it has to be noted that Efnysien is one of only, I think, 2 figures within the 4 branches of the Mabinogi as a whole. There are only, I think, 2 times where specific lines of poetry appear, where a figure is portrayed as himself or herself a poet and speaks lines of poetry. And this is in, I believe Gwydion may be the other one in the 4th branch, but Efnysien is this other one. Efnysien then is one of the only explicit poets within the Mabinogi, the 4 branches. That suggests that he, once again, is this god who is simultaneously the destroyer, the hostile one, but then that he is almost paradoxically also this poet, one of the main poets of the entire Mabinogi. That is because he is this Rudra type who is also known as Finn in the other Celtic branch, and that is known as Odin, etc. And so when Efnysien enters the house in this Vastoshpati type role, that is when he speaks out his lines of poetry as he is cleansing the house. It's this perfect encapsulation of the Rudra role, specifically the Vastoshpati role, that is found in the Rig Veda version of this creation myth, and thus goes very far back, is very ancient, and seemingly Proto-Indo-European. We then have in Rig Veda 10.61, the same hymn where that just happened, it is said that the king, as a ritual adept, goes across the waters, becoming a bridge himself. So the divine king is asked or said to cross waters and himself become a bridge. And I'll read you the exact passage. So this is Rig Veda 10.61, verse 16. And the translators believe the king being addressed here is the human patron who this hymn is being performed for, and this sacrifice in this hymn is being done for. So the human king gets to step into the role of the archetypal sovereign in this line, because this seems like it may come from an original mythic motif that then this king is sort of stepping into, because we see that the divine king, the figure who is symbolizing and embodying the sovereign in the myth of Branwen, that is Bran himself, that he specifically does the same thing with his body. He crosses over the ravine where the waters are, he crosses over the waters with his body, and Bran says when he makes his own body a bridge across the waters of this ravine, he says, "Except that he will be chief or king, let him be a bridge. I will be so." And so then his armies pass over his body that has become the bridge, right as they are going to fight this war against Mythology and to end this union of earth and sky that he and Branwen represent. Now, in the Rig Veda verse, Rig Veda 10.61, verse 16, it says, quote, "This king praised here has been extolled as a ritual adept. And as inspired poet, he crosses the waters, creating his own bridge," unquote. And so it seems like these mythic motifs were connected. It is extremely coincidental, and I think beyond coincidence, that this invocation of the king as crossing the waters and himself becoming the bridge is connected with this event where the Rudra type attacks specifically Father Sky, Diaush, right when he is in the middle of an abusive sexual act with his own female other half, who in various versions is represented as Earth, usually. In this Vedic version, it is just called his daughter, but then when this union is attacked, the seed of Father Sky is said to fall onto the lap of Earth, essentially, to fall into Earth. And from there, the ancestors of humans emerge out of the fire. And so this is all aligned, although in different ways, because of course the seed of Father Sky is falling into Earth in the Uranos and Gaia version as well. And his seed that falls creates the ancestors of humans, the ash nymphs as well. So different pieces, slightly differently represented, but we have a bit too coincidental, the cleansing of the house with the demonic presence by the Rudra type, who is also the poet and destroyer. And he has this peace-bringing other side that is like his other half. And there are, in the Norse version, 3 brothers. In the Irish version, 3 main brothers. And in the Welsh version, we have 4 brothers, including Bran. But Bran is the equivalent god type, in my opinion, to Averdaun. Averdaun is the one who dies early, leaving the other 3. And so we actually have 3 main brothers, and then this 4th sovereign brother of a different god type. But nonetheless, you have 3 to 4 brothers who show these different aspects of one being the peace-bringing god, one being the destroyer god, and together they perform this specific attack. Now, even in the Welsh story, the ancestors of the humans emerge from this event. We have dramatically Gwern, whose name means alder. He's the son, he's this offspring of Branwen and Mythology. Thus he seems to sort of stand in for the seed that falls in the other versions. And he is thrown to the ground into the fire. In the Vedic version, the seed of Diaush, Father Sky, when he is attacked, his seed falls to ground and creates a fire pit on the ground. And from there, eventually, spring the humans, the Angirases, who are the ancestors of humans. In the Welsh version, the 4 brothers that I just mentioned, they all meet Gwern, this boy who is the offspring, and then Efnysien specifically, after they've all met him,
he picks him up and throws him into the fire that is on the earth, killing him. It is this same mythic event of the offspring, the symbolic offspring of Father Sky, Mythology, being cast down into what is essentially a pit of fire on the earth. In the Vedic version, again, the seed falling creates the lake of fire there, from which ancestors emerge. In the Welsh version, Gwern himself is thrown into a fire and dies. But then when the story concludes, when the war concludes, that is, mysteriously, the ancestors of the humans of the region are found in the hills. So it is this story, this mytheme that appears right where it should, that is, in the conclusion of this conflagration, of this battle. The ancestors of humans suddenly appear out of the hills, which are symbolic of, the womb of the earth, in a sense, as we see in the other versions, with these mythemes happening in order, but in a different way. So we have all of the pieces, essentially. We have a very deep, ancient set of details that, in the Welsh version especially, it is more detailed than many of the mythic creation myths we have. And as I just pointed out, many of these specific details go all the way back to being shared with the Rig Veda itself. Thus, they actually go back to Proto-Indo-European details and mythemes. So to suggest that it's just an echo of a myth or not qualifying as a myth throws the whole definition of what a myth is into chaos, because it is actually more detailed than many myths that we have, and so it just doesn't, that sort of redefining things doesn't work. It's much more accurate to say that it is a euhemerized romance retelling of a very detailed myth, and that's what's incredible about it. And along with this, we even have in this Rig Veda version of this myth of the Rudra-Agni, who attacks Dyaush, Father Sky, and Rudra is the one who has as his other face the peaceful. So all in all, it is really Rudra Shiva, who is one, and then he is also one with Agni, the third brother. In this myth, in the hymns of the Rig Veda, we have the archer, who is Rudra Agni, and it is said that Agni, the Agni half, actually prepares the seed for Father Sky, or the juice, which is this soma that sort of becomes his inflamed semen, which he then emits. It is this procedure that suggests, as Stella Cromrish has explained in her book, The Presence of Shiva, she explains how what this means is that Agni has actually prepared the sacred liquid that has been sort of implanted or given to Father Sky, and then it is also implied that Agni is what inflames that passion within Father Sky, because Agni is the fire itself. And then after he's inflamed this passion, which comes out in the sexual violence he does to his own other half, his female other half, when that has come about, Agni then turns and attacks that improper, that violent, illicit act, because it is against cosmic order, even though he himself has caused this to come about. Well, what we have with the Welsh story is that Manawydan and Bran, who are half-brothers, they actually give the cauldron, this sacred cauldron that they have, to Mythology as a sort of peace offering to try to make peace, because Efnysien has mangled and mauled his horses, trying to drive him away, trying to stop the marriage from happening in the first place. The only thing that Efnysien has done by mauling the horses is inflamed the tensions, which will lead to war. And his brothers have then given this cauldron, which cauldrons often symbolize sacred liquid. This cauldron of a sacred liquid, they have given it to Mythology. So the brothers connected to Efnysien
have given the sacred liquid, have caused the sacred liquid to be prepared and given to Mytholic, just as in Rigveda 1.71. And as a result, the Rudra type, Efnysien, turns and leads his brothers, along with Bran, of course, on this war path to then attack Mytholic, who they have just prepared and given the sacred liquid to. It's the exact same archaic ancient mythemes that are in the Rig Veda itself that I've just described. And it's this paradoxical back and forth where they have set things in motion. Efnysien and his brothers have set things in motion themselves, kind of causing this problem, and then preparing and giving the sacred liquid, and that sacred liquid then becomes a problem in the war. That cauldron becomes a problem for them. And then, of course, in the climax of the war, there is the famous moment where Efnysien has this moment of clarity and says, "It is I who have caused all of this." He realizes that he has set things in motion in this chain of events from the start. He has this sort of remorse and wishes to set things right because, of course, this is a representative of a deity. As I'm explaining, he's not evil in what he wanted. He has a certain divine role in the metaphysics that were underlying this, in the theology that underlied this. And he, although he has set things in motion, just as Rudra Agni did in the Vedas, he then turns and wants to stop things with violence, and finally he self-sacrifices to destroy the cauldron that has been part of this cycle, and to finally end the war by destroying that too powerful cauldron. So it is this same paradoxical back and forth that we see with Rudra Agni in his role in the Rigvedic myth. And additionally, one thing that I sort of forgot to mention there is that, of course, the brothers Bran, Efnysien, Nisien, and Manawydan are specifically called to by Branwen to come rescue her from her abusive marriage. She sends a bird with a message to her brothers that she is in trouble and that violence is being done to her, etc. And they then come to end this union violently with their war. In the story of Cronus and Uranos and Gaia, specifically, Gaia is being, of course, violently treated by Uranos, and she then seeks out Cronus and says, "Come attack Uranos." Specifically, "Come attack Uranos." She tells him how, and he comes and attacks Uranos, leading to this further war. And so it is told, of course, slightly differently, but it is the same core mythic motifs, all in order, and it can't be understood without understanding these. When you understand the Welsh version, it's much more easy to see it as a support for what's happening in the Irish version, because many of the same mythic events are there, but in a reduced kind of form. So it's hard to be really confident with just the Irish version, of course, but in comparative mythology, one version, one branch does not stand alone. That is not the full argument. You can see the core of the events in the Irish version, but once you have this extremely detailed Welsh version, it essentially proves that the Irish version is telling the same series of events, because we know that type of story was current in the Celtic world and with specific mythic motifs connected to it. One of them being that there are three main brothers with a fourth brother who is this Down/Bran type, and that the three brothers who specifically are the attackers on Father Sky, in most versions, that they are three parts of one Rudra type god, Rudra Shiva Agni. And so that is why in the Irish version we have Averfin, who is a Rudra, the leader of the Mannerbund, who is a poet and esoteric prophet, and all of these things, and has other specific Rudra Shiva mythic parallels. Averfin is brother of Averghin. Averghin is this more peace-weaving poet. Therefore, he is the Shiva type, similar to Heinir. And then Erevan is this third brother who attacks along with them. And then Erevan would be in this third brother role, which in my opinion is the Agni role. So we can deduce that he might have been originally from an Agni type, or that there was something underlying both of those, where there's a third brother bringing together the unity of Rudra and Shiva. And so that is the explanation for why do Everfin, Averghin, and Erevan, specifically like a heat-seeking missile, attack only the three brothers who are husbands of Earth, husbands of Eru and her sisters. Why is that the case? And it's highlighted as the very culmination of the war. It is because it's this core motif, which has all of these supports in nearly every branch of mythology, specifically Indo-European branches, but also appearing as this basic idea even in Sumerian and Egyptian myths, where Earth is always divided from sky or heavens in this primordial violence. It sort of goes without saying that the triple father sky, Mac Cecht, Mac Quill, and Mac Grania, that their names are apparently symbolic. You're not necessarily going to have, if you divide Father Sky, if you divide the sky god into three symbolic parts, they're not necessarily all going to be called Sky 1, Sky 2, and Sky 3. Clearly, we have them as the mirror image pair of the three earth goddesses, and therefore their names likely pertain to a specific symbolic division of the sky domain that made sense to the ancients. And so we have Mac Quill, meaning son of hazel, Mac Grania, son of the sun, and Mac Cecht, which can mean son of the plow or son of power. These are symbolic names, and they could be applied to the sky in any number of ways. What makes a lot of sense to me is that if they were symbolic words connected to the seasons, to three seasonal divisions of the year, and thus of the sky of the year, there are other possible ways that these symbols could have been used, and we actually don't get to say that you can't use the plow as a symbol of the sky, or you can't use any given thing, because it may have made perfect sense to them to name these three figures with these particular names, and yet this triple division still have been a sky division. They also get their celestial quality, seemingly, because they are the grandsons of the Dagda himself, who has both celestial connections to the sun, and connections to plowing and preparing and digging up the soil and clearing the soil himself. And so they are, in a way, a division of qualities already foreseen in their grandfather, the Dagda, but in themselves, they're like the heaven or sky itself when in the unity with the Mother Earth, which will harden and become the material shell of the cosmos when divided. Just as Ymir's skull becomes the material shell that is the heavens when it is severed from his body, which becomes Earth, or the goddess Jord. And so the names themselves are no problem for this, because we have the Welsh version to confirm what is happening in this myth type in the Celtic world, and there are easy explanations for how these names could be symbolic of things related to a division of the sky domain. It may be esoteric how these symbols worked, yet the context tells us that this is the position of the sky, and it very well could be a logical set of names pertaining to what the sky brings, its powers, and its associations. Fertility, light of the sun, and whatever the hazel connects to, which may connect to night or something else. So to that we should add, of course, the Yama type parallel that then follows even in this Welsh version. Because as we said, Aver Down is this down type, D-O-N-N, who Aver Down appears to be the first to die as they're entering Ireland, the first male god figure. And of course he then, in the mythology, in the folklore, becomes lord of this Isle of the Dead. He has his own isle. In the Welsh story, it is Bran who he is struck by a mortal blow, and then he requests for his head to be severed, but his head lives on in a sort of living death state, and specifically his head is then taken directly to a special isle that then is, in a sense, the Isle of Bran's feasting, the Isle of the entertainment of the sacred head, which is Bran. In this isle, it is a sort of otherworld because they are to go on feasting for an indeterminate amount of time and forget all the cares of the world, like this sort of Edenic location, like this sort of eerie otherworld in some sense, and only when the door is open by one of the people there will the cares of the world rush back in, and they will have to continue their normal mundane lives. But for this indeterminate time, they are in this other world with this severed head, euhemerized deity, Bran, on this isle. So it seems to me that Bran, being the one to die before returning, along with Efnysien and others, of course, but among the main figures that are not the Rudra Efnysien, it is Bran. And Yama symbolizes the sovereign, just as Bran does in his role. He becomes identified as Dharmaraj, the Dharma king in Indian material, and of course Yima of the Iranic material, his cognate, becomes also Jamshid or Yamshid in the epic version, where he is this ideal king. He stands for sovereignty. He has in himself the Kvanare, which is the sacred sort of chrism of sovereignty and favor of the gods. And so that is this Yama type. And then finally, Yima gets cut in half in the conclusion of his story, whereas Bran gets his head severed from his body, a similar type of cutting in half. So it seems clear to me, along with further arguments where Victor Rydberg has shown that the severed head god Mimir is seemingly the Yama type in his work, because Mimir seems to have this grove where he preserves the humans Lif and Lifthrasir, and it is Yima of the Avesta who preserves the humans during the great winter, just as Lif and Lifthrasir are in Mimir's grove. It is this continuous myth type of this god who is cut in half or his head severed. And that is then Bran, who has this otherworldly island where he is a severed head, which of course is connected to death consistently in most mythologies. And thus Bran seems to be the parallel of this Yama type and this Dawn type, because Dawn is the one who has this isle that parallels the island of Gwales for the Irish, Tecdwyn, and and therefore we have in both stories another myth theme that is continuous with this Dawn or Bran type of god being one of the main ones to die before the story is concluded, and that they both then kind of go to this otherworldly island. Just as in the Vedas, Yama is the first demigod or divine figure who gives up his immortality to become mortal and then becomes the first mortal to die, then becoming the lord of the otherworld, of a land of the dead, which is like a paradise. Like Bran's Isle is this Edenic place outside of time where the cares of the world don't enter until you break the sort of rule and then you are cast back out. There is a reason why Yama himself and Yima have been compared to Adam in his paradise garden, because Yama has a similar garden paradise connected to his otherworld and underworld location. In any case, this is yet another mytheme that carries through seemingly this Yama-type god being one of the prominent deaths, and then the immediate transfer of him to this Isle, where he oversees a kind of otherworld, death in life state, and is a sort of symbol of death there, and while also being this symbol of the king. All of these things. It is said that you go to drink with Yama in his tree, essentially, in the Vedic material. And so it is this concept of going to drink, just like going to feast with Bran. You have to take all of those things together, and it becomes clear that each detail is carefully chosen, carefully preserved from archaic original models, and is telling a coherent story that pertains symbolically to the creation and to a creation myth. In the conclusion, again, just as Eru and her sisters die and their 3 husbands die and are killed violently, so also Matholwch is defeated and dies, and then Branwen also dies of a broken heart. She then is placed into the earth with some symbolism there of the 4 directions perhaps, and it is like she is becoming one with the earth in this symbolic scene because, of course, she is the earth goddess. This probably connects to the argument that some scholars have put forward that her original name was probably Bronwen, as it appears, I think, in the triads, and Bronwen, Bronwen instead of Bran. Bronwen would mean something like white breast, and that would be symbolic language describing the earth or mountain tops connected to the earth and that sort of thing, and thus being consistent with her as the earth goddess. Whereas Matholwch, his name seems to mean good. Now, Diaush, who is the father sky, the embodied sky, also known as Div in the myths that I described, he is the primary god who is called Vasu, the Vasu. So Vasu is a category of gods, the Vasus, but it is Diaush who is the Vasu, and his incarnation in the epics, Bhishma, is born of Vasu specifically. So there's a direct continuity between Diaush and Vasu. Vasu is then this epithet that he has, and it means good. So Diaush is this primary god who has this epithet meaning good. Thus, we can see that there's probably a continuity of Matholwch's name to this archaic epithet of the god who is the sky. None of these things can be understood fully without understanding the comparative mythology. It's sort of like a language that these myths are speaking in, and if you don't know the language, then you're not going to be able to comment on what is happening. So it's not about opinions, it's not about my opinion or anyone's opinion, it's about the arguments and having a set of arguments for this, and I think there's an overwhelming amount of comparative data that we have to show the consistency of this myth type, and it always involves these same god types doing these specific actions, and that's what really confirms that this is what's happening. Along with that, of course, we have the further generations coming before Everfin, leading to the Axis Mundi Briochen of the Tower, which is this universal symbol of the Axis Mundi, but also this specific Indo-European symbol connected to the Brahman, sharing the root with Briochen himself, and being the source of a creation myth. And of course, the seam that scholars have noted that appears right there before Briochen, suggesting that this was a coherent story beginning right with Briochen. So I hope you will seek to learn this information, this language of what the myth is telling us, because the Celts do have creation myths. They have a core creation myth type, which I've just described in the Irish and Welsh stories, but they also have other motifs and other versions in other places. So with all of that together, it becomes, in my opinion, rather ridiculous to say there are only echoes of a creation myth, or that there is no creation myth at all, perhaps, because it's just not true and it's not what's happening. So you can't really just say things.